Hey everybody, it's Guy with that Kilted Guy videos, and today I just wanted to talk to you guys about the subject of paint and primer in one. I know a lot of my homeowners, after I've done a drywall repair, they're often confused about the need to use primer. They think that because this has got paint and primer in one, that should be all they need. Well, we're going to test that today on a few different types of surfaces and see how that works, and I'm going to discuss that a little further right after this. Okay, we're back, and hey, thanks for stopping by my channel too. I really appreciate it, and I hope you guys are subscribing so you get notified of all these videos we're putting out. We're trying to help you out with some of these subjects, and today's subject is the paint plus primer subject. Now, it kind of confuses some people because this sounds like, hey, it's got paint and primer in one. Why do I need to prime anything? Well, there is still a need for it. And paint and primer is a good product. This is the one I use, the Super Paint, the Sherwin-Williams Super Paint. And it does have some advantages. The main advantage is it will help cover minor scuff marks, minor stains, things like that. But when it comes to more serious stains and trying to get better coverage over difficult colors like this, you're going to want to go ahead and do the paint and primer. I mean, the primer first and then the paint. Now, that's not to say that you can't just put 2 coats of the paint on here and get probably pretty similar results. It just depends on what you're trying to cover, because 2 coats will cover pretty good, but it's likely to still bleed through. We're going to test that today. First, we're going to do a coat, just 1 coat of paint and primer here, 1 coat of primer here, and then we're going to come back after we take a look at it and go ahead and put a coat of the paint and primer over here and a 2nd coat of paint and primer here. And we're going to see how it covers some of these that I created here. I thought we'd come up with some fairly difficult colors to cover, and we're using this color right here to go over all this. Now this, you can see we got a red paint, a black paint, a darker brownish paint, some black magic marker, red magic marker, and some ink. And I've labeled them all here so we don't lose them. And on this side, I've marked them with a piece of tape where they're supposed to come out, because they may disappear pretty good on film. We're going to see about that. It's hard to say how well things are going to cover, but in my experience, it's generally works out better to go ahead and prime it and then paint it, because even if you do 2 coats of paint over here and you get pretty good results, it costs a lot more. Paint's like 2 to 3 times as much as primer. So you can do a coat of primer and paint for much less than 2 coats of paint. That's one of the big considerations. Now we're also going to try the same technique over here with raw drywall mud and raw drywall. Plus I've set up a piece of pine here, and I've marked it. We're going to do the same thing. We've got the plain pine here, then we're going to prime, then paint, and we're going to do paint and primer only. So we've got it all marked so that we'll know in the end what's what. And we left this one plain just for a reference. Now I noticed I forgot to divide this one, so let's divide that real quick so we know what's what. We're just going to do this section right here. This is just another demonstration I did on another video. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and mark it the same as here. We got paint plus primer, and then primer, then paint. Okay, now for the primer, what we're using today is the Kills 2. You can see here it's a multi-surface stain blocking primer, and has, each one of them is a little bit different. Don't assume primer is primer. You need to kind of buy the primer that fits what you're doing. In this case, stain blocking is going to help us hide some of these difficult stains. And it has the sealing ability. It tells you on here it's also a sealer, so that it's going to work good on the porous surfaces, because you want to seal those to even out the porosity. So I think first thing we're going to do is try some primer on this side. I'll get my paint roller loaded up here. Usually takes a time or two, but we're just going to go right over all this. Yeah, we'll just stop right up here. Now, one thing I'll point out is primer usually doesn't cover in one coat. That's not the job of primer. It's, if you see the stain showing through, that's usually pretty normal. There's some that cover a little better than others, but don't worry too much about that. We'll just put a good solid coat on here. That's almost too much, so we got primer then paint over here. I'll take a little bit off. When your roller's just sliding, like mine kind of was, it's a little too much. All right, we got a good coat right there. So we're going to let that dry. And of course you can see everything's coming through. Now when we put the paint on this side with the paint and primer, it's probably going to look like it covers even better than that. But the proof in the pudding here is going to be what the end result is, not what it looks like while it's wet. So we'll get this one coated over here, and then we've got the wood, so we've got kind of labeled them backwards here, but we'll do the primer right here. And then that's it for that. Now I'm going to change out my roller, and then we're going to switch over and go ahead and put a coat of paint on all these other surfaces, and then we're going to let it dry and see what it looks like once it's dry. And the primer has a 1 hour recoat time, which means you can recoat it in 1 hour, but the paint is almost always 4 hours. So we're going to let it dry overnight to see for sure what the end result is. And by the way, you like my fuzzy hat? That's not my hair, by the way. I have a lot of people come up to me and ask me how I do my hair like this through this hat. It's just a hat, but it's kind of fun to wear. And since it's wintertime here in Colorado, it's actually warmer. So I'm going to go change that roller out and I'll get back to you. Okay, hey, I'm back. Got a clean roller on here. We're ready to try the paint. I wanted to point out another thing or two about the primer. Let me explain what primer is basically about. Primer is not about coloring. It's not about making your surface white. Yeah, it has white pigment in it, and that helps if you're putting a light colored paint over the top of this. But the main job of primer, and again it depends on which one you buy, is first of all to seal the surface. And what that does is it evens out the porosity. Because like for example over here, this is way more porous than this is. Now let's say we did a repair on a painted surface, then this would be even more porous than the surrounding painted surface. And if you just paint right over it, it's going to suck a lot of the paint into your repair, and it's going to flash. And by flashing, that means that the sheen's going to look a little bit different, especially when you stand kind of to the side. And when you got that different looking sheen, it's just going to telegraph right where your repair was. So primer's first purpose is to seal the surface and even out the porosity. The other, again, depending on which one you buy, is stain blocking. And stains often are like water stains. If you have a leak in a ceiling that comes through the sheetrock, it'll turn it this yellowish brown color, and that will bleed right through the drywall mud and right through the paint. So you need to seal that surface and stain block it. Stain blocking can also work on these colors to help if you're doing a dramatic color change, let's say you, and I've had this happen quite a few times, a customer buys a house, it's got maroon walls, and you want to paint them a whitish color. Well, if you paint right over that, it's probably going to bleed through, not look very good. So we put a stain blocking type primer on there first, and then 1 or 2 coats of paint, and that'll take care of it. And on that subject, 2 coats of paint is always better than 1. You can get by with 1 a lot of times, but if you want the best looking, most even paint job with the best coverage, go for 2 coats. It's not usually that much more money. So if you can afford it and you want the best, do that. So let's go ahead and load up our roller and get a coat of paint on here. And we'll do the same basic technique. We'll go ahead and start from about here, come on down. Okay, now I'm going to put a little more on, but you can see with just an average coat of paint, every one of them is bleeding through. Hopefully you can see that. You can see every one of these, and you can see most of these. But we're going to go ahead and lay it on a little bit thicker, but you really don't want to try and just, pour the paint on here. If you put so much on here that your roller's sliding or the paint's running and such, you're putting it on way too heavy, and that's really not the right way to go about it. But let's go ahead and put a little bit heavier coat on here, and you'll see it's going to cover quite a bit better. Okay, that's a pretty average coat of paint right there. Now we're going to do the same thing over here. And this will be over the raw drywall section. Now I've made these marks here so that we can tell where that was supposed to start and stop, so I'll try not to lose that. See if I put enough paint in here. Get a little bit more. And I can tell you that trying to show flashing and that on camera doesn't show really well, because whenever you point a camera at a surface and then point the light in the same direction, it tends to wash out a lot of what the human eye can see. But I'm going to try and demonstrate that for you. Now we got the paint and primer for the wood. Now on surfaces that are kind of difficult to stick to, and surfaces like wood, primer is better at adhering to those surfaces. So especially if you have a difficult surface like a glossy paint that you're painting over, even wood, things like that, that maybe paint really doesn't stick to the best, put the primer on first, and then the paint will stick to the primer sticks to the wood, you got a better surface. Works the same way with painting cars. I've painted quite a few cars before, like this example. This is my personal Model T. We're going to be featuring that car on a video on our other channel called Attitude Motorsports channel, if you want to check out some of what's going on over there. I painted that car, I've painted quite a few others, and you never ever paint a car with just paint right over metal. You always put the primer on because it bonds better with the metal and or the old paint, and then you put the paint over that, and that's the way it sticks the best. So now we got these 3 surfaces with a coat of paint and just primer and a paint and primer. We're going to let this dry overnight and see what it looks like in the morning. So check back with me here, and it's probably just going to be a flash on video, but we'll be back right after this. Hey everybody, we're back on day 2. It's been about 24 hours, and I just got off work, been doing a popcorn ceiling repair. Don't do that very much. Usually they want us to take it away. Anyway, we let this stuff dry overnight, and now it looks totally different. Yesterday this looked like it had perfect coverage, and today it's a little different. I'm going to show a close-up right here in this picture. I'll just expand it over the whole screen. Now, if you take a look at it, you can see that the bottom line, where it says red, is showing, the black is showing, the brown is showing, the black magic marker, the red magic marker, and the ink all bled through. And you can see the other one, of course, on here, they all bled through, which I told you they probably would. This doesn't. We're not trying to get full coverage with the primer. Sometimes you need a couple coats of primer. I suspect this red magic marker may go ahead and bleed through, but we're going to go ahead and just do the one coat of primer and see how that comes out. We want to see just how good this sealed, or if maybe it didn't seal so good. There's only one way to find out. But anyway, it's not terrible, but if you were trying to cover up these colors, there's the red, the black, the brown, the black magic marker, the red, and the ink. So even with the paint and primer, it didn't solve the problem. So today what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put some more paint on these, including over here. Now if you look at this picture, it actually didn't come out too terribly bad. With the picture right here, I did some side lighting. You can see a little bit of flashing going on, but it actually did pretty good. And the primer side, it looks pretty good too. So we're going to go ahead and put a coat of paint on that. Here, we've got the primer. And if you look at the close-up of this section right here, you can see that there is some background coming through on this one with just the paint only. So I think what we would do is go ahead and put a coat of paint on everything. So now we'll have 2 coats of paint on this, coat of primer and paint, 2 coats of paint, primer and paint, and so on. Let's go ahead and do that and see how it looks today. Then what we're going to do is let this one dry overnight, and we're going to come back and take a look at how it came out when it's dry. So we're going to put the same basic medium solid coat of paint on here, and not going to lay it on really heavy. So we'll go ahead and do the same thing over here. And so far both of them are looking really good. But the big question is tomorrow. We'll let these dry overnight and see what they look like. But looking at them at this stage, I'm not seeing any bleed through so far. But reds and such sometimes come through later. We'll leave that one as is. Put a coat of paint on this one, and I can pretty much tell you this one's going to look really good tomorrow, because it already looks pretty decent just as is. And like I was telling you before, you can go ahead and put 2 coats of paint on it and do about the same thing as paint and primer, unless you need a stain blocker. Then you might want to go ahead and do that, but it's just more expensive to do it that way. Because you can usually, and again, it depends on the primer you're buying. If you're buying just a PVA type basic drywall primer, nothing else, you're looking at maybe $10 a gallon. Fairly cheap stuff if you buy it in the 5s. But if you buy a stain blocker, it can go $18 to $25, maybe even $30 a gallon if you buy them by the gallon. So it might not save you money, but if you're trying to cover a stain, your best bet to be safe is just get a stain blocking primer. Okay. There we go. That's my assignment for today. Paint everything. I think I got it all. And gonna let that dry, and we're gonna check out and see what happens tomorrow. So stick with us, because by the magic of video, it's gonna happen here in about 5 seconds. Okay, here it goes. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm back again today, and today we're gonna discuss the results of the paint plus primer, plus the primer and then paint. And now that everything is dry, we're going to see how it really came out. Well, overall, we got some really good results with the paint with the primer with 2 coats. So remember, with 1 coat, everything showed through. And this may be a little hard to see, so I'm going to show you a bigger example here in a minute. But the worst one was the red magic marker. Totally bled through again, no coverage at all. Whereas with the stain blocking, it mostly, I'd say about 98% blocked. If you look really close, and you probably can't see it from there, a little tiny hint of it shows through. But the point of this is it did a lot better. So let's show a bigger example of this on the screen for you. I think I'll pull it down from right up here. And now if you look at it, you can see on the screen, the top line is the red magic marker, and you can see it showing through. But if you look at all the others where I peeled off the center line of paint, you can see that as it goes under the paint and under the paint with primer, it's pretty much hidden. So let's get that big thing out of the way again, and we're back to just looking at it on camera here. So basically, the stain blocking, primer, and then paint with primer over it did the best job by far. This did pretty good on all the other colors except the worst, which I knew it was going to be the magic marker, the red one. That's always the worst thing you can try and paint over. Now on the other examples, there's not really a whole lot to show here, but I'm going to put a big picture up here too. And now you'll see this big picture. The main thing you can see is on the left side, there's a more unevenness to the texture. The stippling of the paint with 2 coats of paint is uneven over the portion where the drywall mud is underneath it, whereas with the primer first and then the paint, it actually gave it a more even stipple over the whole thing. So now let's get rid of that one. And the final one is the wood. And you saw before that with the paint, the paint and primer only, it actually telegraphed through some of the colors. So it was showing through. The priming it and then painting it, it took, before you just saw the primer, so of course it was showing through. Now we have just 1 coat of paint, 1 coat of primer, and it looks just as good as the 2 coats of paint plus primer. And again, the big difference you want to keep in mind is that this is cheaper to put a coat of primer on, which costs about half as much or even less than it is to put 2 coats of paint on. So if you're doing very much painting, the cheapest way is to prime it first. But if you just got a little spot repair, you might be able to get by with the 2 coats of paint. Probably will, depending on the quality of your paint and your painting skills. Well, hey everybody, I really appreciate you stopping by. I hope this helped you out today. And we're gonna shoot a whole bunch more videos out there for you. Hopefully they help you out with other issues you got. If you have any suggestions for us or any comments, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. And if you like this video, a little thumbs up. If you don't, give us a thumbs down. We want to know how we're doing. And as always, at the end of this video is a clickable link where you can click on the pictures and the icons and either follow to another video or to subscribe. And we do appreciate your subscription. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, it's that Kilted guy. Hey, I forgot my kilt today. What can I say? And we'll talk to you next time.